Jesus' trademark sermon. We sometimes call it the Sermon on the Mount, though in Luke's version, it's not on a mountain, it's on a level place. It says that Jesus made a point of going to a level place, perhaps to emphasize the importance of equality of all people in one place. And we looked at the Beatitudes last week, and we're continuing looking at what he had to say in the conclusion of this sermon. And it contains some of the hardest and also most beautiful words in all of the New Testament. I say to you, listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, turn the other cheek. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. These are beautiful words that can guide us in our own personal spiritual lives, I think. And at the same time, they can be challenging words as we apply them, not only sometimes in circumstances where there is oppression and liberation in tension with each other, or in circumstances like some of the ones that I've seen this week, and I'll detail them in a moment. But what does it mean to love your enemies? What does it mean to do good to those who persecute you? To turn the other cheek? Does it mean that we simply allow people to treat us any way they want to, and that we never speak up for ourselves or for others? Or is there a deeper, more important kind of love that Jesus is calling all of us to? It's not love to ignore oppression. It is love to resist, and to resist in whatever means we have available to us, depending upon the measure of that oppression. It is love to speak up in criticism of what's happening in terms of politics or the structures of society that make it difficult for us to live out Jesus' view of equality and love for all people. And I got to see that many times this week. Perhaps you saw in the news two very high visibility examples, and they occurred first early in the week when a former NFL player, Chris Kluwe. Now, I'm the first to tell you, and probably someone will remind me, is Jim talking about football? Does he know the first thing about football? Why, no, but I did learn about it this week just so I could quote this, and including how to pronounce his name. Chris Kluwe has always been an outspoken member of society. When he was an NFL player, he was outspoken, and in recent years he's continued to do that. And this week, the Huntington Beach Library in Southern California was installing a plaque for its 50th anniversary. But on it, they had enshrined an acronym for MAGA, specific words. Let's see if I had them right here. No, I'll try to remember them. But it was, they took word magnificent, amazing, something, something, G and A. And they were in prominent letters on the plaque. And if you know anything about librarians, and I used to be one, they don't like stuff like that. The importance of freedom and the library as a place of learning is deeply held. So Chris Kluwe spoke up at the Huntington Beach City Council saying that it's not right to include this signal in support of what he called Nazi-like impulses. And so he was willing to go to jail. After he made his speech, he said, "And now I will exercise my First Amendment right," and he laid down and he was arrested and carried out. He said, why did he do this? He said, because I have privilege as a white male, and privilege and power. And it's important that those who have privilege and power, like I do, be out there on the front lines supporting those who are being oppressed, because we cannot expect the people being oppressed to do all the work. It's on all of our shoulders to do that work. And I hope other people are brave enough and willing enough to do this. And you might not agree with his politics, but what I was most moved by in the visuals of this was that he did this, and no one came to his defense, though there were many supporters there. He was carried out alone, and no one else stood up. I saw that again on the news when our current president was at a meeting of the governors of all the states a few days ago. and he was emphasizing for them his most recent executive order that was against transgender inclusion. And he called out the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, who was there. He says, "Is Maine in the House? Is she here?" And she said, "Yes, yes, I am here." And here's how the exchange went. "Are you going to comply with this?" President Trump said. And she said, "No, of course not. I'm going to comply with state and federal laws." "We are the federal law," said Trump. "You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports." She said, "We're going to follow the law, sir. We'll see you in court." And he said, "Well, your life after being governor won't be much because I don't think you'll be an elected official after this." And I admired that she, of the 50 governors present, was willing to speak up clearly on behalf of transgender people. And what I want us to note about it is no other governor spoke up in that meeting. One voice out of 50 challenging transgender discrimination. I realize it's a complex issue, but there's something about the power and the meaning of what it means to love. Who do we love? How do we express that love? How is it played out in the public sphere while people are watching? And I admired her for her willingness to speak out like that. I believe that she was expressing love in that moment. Then this week was one instance after another where I saw instances where people were being oppressed or discriminated against in various ways, organizing and speaking up in solidarity with each other. This is what I believe love looks like, what it means to love your enemies and what it means to pray for those who persecute you. It also doesn't mean that you give up and acquiesce to any situation, especially one of injustice or inequality. Love means you can love your enemy and still speak the truth in power, speak truth to power, speak the truth in love. So how did I see that? Wednesday morning, I gathered with a group of religious leaders in downtown San Francisco at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, and then we walked about a mile and a half through Japantown to a Japanese Presbyterian church where we had a ceremony commemorating the Executive Order 9066, 83 years ago, when the then president ordered the mass incarceration, deportation, and detention of over 100,000 Japanese and Japanese American citizens, including very specifically in this area, in San Mateo County. They were sequestered, as we've said before, at Tan Foran Mall, and then deported to camps in remote areas. Their property was seized and never restored. And so this was a commemoration of that event, but also it was in solidarity with current executive orders that are ordering the mass deportation of our neighbors, some of whom are citizens, some of whom are not citizens or undocumented, some of whom them are in family configurations, some of whose birthright citizenship is being challenged. It's important to note that the American government under President Reagan in 1989 repudiated the events that took place in the 1940s. But it took over 40 years for that to happen. But we were marching in solidarity through Japantown where these very things had happened before. And we were chanting, "No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here. No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here." And we heard from survivors of that incarceration in the 1940s about how this deportation had affected their lives and their families' lives for generations to come. And we also heard from family members and people who are right now under threat of deportation, having their families torn asunder and being removed from this country without due process in many circumstances. To hear the two together made a deep impression on me. And I understood that the words "love your enemies," turn the other cheek, don't mean just being a bystander during this time. We really have to stand up. I was pleased that our own church has supported the organizers of the march, Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, and also their direct financial support of people whose families are literally being torn apart right now. There was a sign, another banner that we carried, God's executive orders. Love thy neighbor, welcome the immigrant, every person is sacred. But it occurred to me, and I heard this over and over again through the speakers, that what happened in 1943 was that nobody spoke up on behalf of the Japanese and Japanese American neighbors right here in this area. And we can't let that happen again today in San Mateo County and in California and around the country. That's the difference. We can do something. We may not be able to prevent it, as many people said, but how we respond makes all the difference in the world. On Thursday morning, the clergy of San Mateo County gathered at the Congregational Church in San Mateo. We were rabbis and ministers and priests. And as a group, we heard from a number of groups that our church supports financially, I'm proud to say again, about ways that we can become involved in this right now. We heard from the Housing Leadership Council about housing as a justice issue. And we heard again from the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity and from In Our Care, which is a group that cares for foster children who have been caught in the criminal justice system in our county, and the demographics of that, and what happens to them at the age of 18 when they age out of the system. We heard from Fix in San Mateo and some other groups as well. And over again, it was impressed upon us that though we may not be able to prevent deportations, I don't know if that will be true or not. We do know that ICE has looked at the prison, the former women's prison in Dublin, California, near enough by, to make that into a deportation center. So I don't know if we can prevent that, but if we can make a difference through how we respond, what do we do? And I think one of my proudest moments ever, and I must credit Mickey for this, was on Saturday, yesterday, when in the fellowship, in the dining room hall, we had over 40 people, I believe, from our neighbors. Some of them belong to other religious groups. I talked to my friend Marion Zimmerman from the Temple Beth Jacob in Redwood City. I sat next to her, and from various churches, Catholics and Protestants, and we were learning what it might mean to have a rapid response team, or to revive this program that had been present during the first time that President Trump was president in 2016. And the response of people was what made the biggest impression on me. We can make a difference as long as we don't end up being bystanders to this and pretending it's not happening while it's happening. I understand the impulse to not want to know about it, but we do know that this very issue affects actually people in our congregation. But even if it did not, I'd like to think that our conviction as Christians would cause us to want to not just be bystanders, even if we're not entirely sure what it is that we can do. One of the concrete things that they were inviting people to do was to be part of a team of people who would at least document and make sure that as much due process surrounded this as it unfolds in our midst, to be companions in this, accompaniment of people who are affected by this and by their families as this next chapter unfolds. And we don't know what the outcome will be, but we can control how we respond. That's a difference. And if you had been here, I'm sure you would have been proud to see how many of us were there and willing to try to make a difference. And I understood finally why stories like the Harriet Tubman story is so important. She believed, against all odds, this person who had been raised to believe she was property and not a person could have agency in her own liberation and in the liberation of other people. She took it to a farther extent than probably any of us might be willing to do, but she risked her life over and over and over again by going back to the place where she had been enslaved to bring people who were currently enslaved to freedom in the North. There were enormous bounties on her head. As I said, she was one of the most famous people in the 19th century. She was also one of the most notorious. But her reputation was that she never lost a person, not when she was helping escort people who had been enslaved to freedom, nor when she was enlisted by the US military to spy and then to run successful military raids to bring large numbers of formerly enslaved people to freedom. So that story has resonance in the present. If the most important thing that God does is to notice evil and to engage us in resisting it, because that's what she believed. She said that she believed that God noticed slavery and that God was so appalled that God enlisted human beings to counter this great evil as it was unfolding. Then Harriet Tubman's story is not just one for the history books, it is one that inspires us in the present. I was reading her why she loved Swing Low, Sweet Chariot so much, because it was a promise of angels coming to carry me home. But the angels were people, not just celestial. They were real human beings who risked their lives to escort people, to accompany them. And the promise that we would all be home together someday. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. And then I remembered something, that this is what I wanted to tell you, and I hope you'll bear with me, because I have the privilege of being a United States citizen. I am white, I'm male, I have many privileges. But I was part of a community who had found sanctuary in San Francisco, like people had all around the country of my age who were gay, who moved to cities to be in neighborhoods where we were concentrated in order to be safe, to feel safe. And in the 1980s, I was working as a pastor in San Francisco, and there was nothing like it. I can't tell you what that feeling of freedom meant, to have moved somewhere where we didn't have to fear for being identified for being gay or for our physical safety, except in one way. The biggest vulnerability that we faced in our gay enclave was from straight white teenagers from the suburbs who would come in because they wanted to, quote, beat up gays. That wasn't the word they used. And so if you lived here, you might remember it, or maybe it didn't register for you on your radar. We were very conscious of it. In our neighborhood, we carried whistles in case some kind of attack like that took place. And the sound of a whistle was not meant to say, run for cover. It was meant to say, come, someone is being attacked. Because we couldn't rely on law enforcement to protect us in that circumstance. And then in 1986, then presidential candidate Lyndon LaRouche introduced Proposition 64, which called for the mandatory testing and incarceration of any person with HIV to be put into camps. And it was a state proposition ballot. You might remember that, or you might not. I remember it very clearly. And I remember how frightened we were, not just of being rounded up, but that nobody would come to our defense if that took place. And I also remember the power that we felt. I was preaching in a service in our church in '86, and these words came through me. I swear they came through me, not from me. I just said, they can't enforce a law that we will not submit to. And I just said it. I don't even know where it came from. I believe it came, as Harriet Tubman believed sometimes, from divine inspiration, because I couldn't have thought of it myself. But the galvanizing effect in the room was very powerful. People stood up and clapped, and it went on for minutes and minutes, not for what I had said, but for the realization that we do have power. We have choices in how we respond. And also, when all was said and done, why was that state proposition not passed? It was a little close for comfort to me, 60-40, I think. But it's because so many people came out as allies and said, we will stand with you. We will not let this happen, and just watch it happen. And that's what I think this is that kind of moment for us. This is that important. We can't be bystanders. And then I was thinking again of these words of Jesus. Love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. I think we can only say those words to one another, and to quote Jesus in that way, if we're willing to be in solidarity with each other when we say them. You will not be persecuted without my companionship, my accompaniment through this as best I can. I was at a concert last night in Berkeley, a Canadian singer, Martin Kerr, a folk singer. Boy, the Canadians have opinions about what's happening right now, I'll say, in the United States. I thought, wow, you're more leftist than I am. But it was out of love, just, but he had a song that we sang that he was an original song of his, where the words were, I'm not so bad myself, but you are amazing. And what he asked us to do, and I love this because it was so awkward, he said, now, turn to each other, look someone in the eye, be awkward, he said. That was a rallying cry for someone like me, because I feel like I've perfected awkward. And he said, say it to them, look them in the eye and make them uncomfortable. Hey, I'm not half bad myself, but you are amazing. And even though it was uncomfortable, it was Berkeley, it made an impression on me. We can do this. We can say things like love your enemies and do good to those who persecute you. If we're saying them looking at each other in the eyes, and what it comes with is a promise of solidarity. Well, that's my invitation this morning. Pray these words of Jesus, because I think they're timeless. And when we're able to take them in, it evokes our best selves, from each other, from ourselves and from each other. But let's also let this be a time not of standing by, but of standing with and alongside, even if we don't entirely understand what that will require of us in the days and months to come. This is a refining moment for us morally, as a community, as a country. And let's live out the best principles of Martin Luther King, of Harriet Tubman, of the people in our midst who are saying, don't let this happen without you being together with us. Amen. In addition to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, at a speech that also took place in a public place to lots of people,